Reading the lineup. This has to be one of the most frustrating things as we start to surf, and something that almost feels outside of our control.
What we're answering today is a question around navigating the lineup to catch waves consistently but fairly. To support this channel, please consider subscribing. This is tip time, now let's get into it.
The first aspect we'll cover is where to sit in the lineup. The first thing we need to consider is making sure you're watching the waves before you go out in the lineup.
Try to look for trends regarding where the waves are breaking. Are they rights or lefts? If you can get a landmark on the shore, like a tree or something else that won't move, this will help in conditions where there's a well-defined peak that isn't shifting too much. This can be trickier in beach break conditions where the peaks are constantly shifting. If you do this though, you can now paddle out and know that your landmark on the beach is putting you in the right spot. The second thing I would suggest is paddling to the pack. This is the biggest mistake, holding back one's positioning in beginner to intermediate surfers, where they will stay away from the crowded area because they either don't want to get in the way or they just want to stay away from the crowds. But in many instances, the crowd is there for a good reason, as this is where the peak is. So this raises a few issues if you're going off on your own and noticing that you're not catching any waves. Another thing I might add that definitely helps is, if possible, go with friends who will place you in the right position and shout you into waves or let you drop in on them. This is because the difficult decision making we have just discussed will be made by the experienced surfers, and you can learn and absorb from copying their positioning.
Alright, so now we're out in the lineup, we're in the right spot, and hopefully the waves will just come to us, right?
Well, I wish that was all there was. But as we know, conditions change, and especially at beach breaks, the peaks can be all over the place, which means they may not be a definitive takeoff spot for you to line yourself up with.
We need to have an understanding of where and how the waves are breaking.
From our beach analysis, we've hopefully been able to identify where the waves are breaking, but knowing what to look for in terms of how they're breaking is also very important. There's a lot that goes into this, and it's hard to ignore that much of this does take lots of experience to become proficient with. But there are some key areas to consider to get you started. The first is understanding whether the waves will be breaking right or left. For this, I use the almond shape analogy, where the wave has a tall crest and tapers off down the line. And if it's peeling in both directions, it can look a bit like an almond. If it's also the same height across the whole wave, we'll all break at a similar time, and it's likely the wave will close out, which isn't what we're after. So this is the first type of wave to avoid paddling into when you're out in the lineup. You want to see a clear, defined tapering off of the wall for the waves you're paddling into.
We also need to become great at understanding where the waves will break first, because without this, we're not able to position ourselves in the right part of the lineup to catch the waves.
A mistake that's made very often is waiting for the waves to come to you, meaning we sit in the same position and don't hunt our waves. As the wave approaches, we need to recognise where the crest/highest point of the wave is and position ourselves in front of that. If we don't and just turn around and paddle where we are, it's likely that we'll be too far out on the shoulder and that the wave won't be steep enough for us to catch. For this reason, there's two aspects to catching a wave, and this is super important. First, we position ourselves correctly for the wave. This can be as significant as paddling 20 meters across the lineup to put ourselves under the crest of the wave as it approaches. After this, we can then paddle for the wave. I believe this separation of these two elements is crucial, as if we try to paddle for the wave whilst we attempt to reposition ourselves further towards the critical section, we won't paddle nearly deep enough and will remain on the shoulder of the wave. So the biggest thing here is to paddle yourself into position nice and early, then turn and paddle for your wave. Don't wait for the wave to come to you, you'll need to hunt the waves down.
Now, within all of this, you can probably tell there's a bunch of sub-skills that we need to get on top of.
These include paddling speed and power to quickly put yourself in the better position for the wave, entry into waves, and popping up in critical sections.
I'll delve into these more in future episodes of Tip Time, but if there's any that you'd particularly like to know more about, make sure you leave that in the comments below as well.